Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Agility Leadership Network's meetup event tonight, where we've got Simon Copsey giving us a talk on leading in complexity. I'm very excited for this. Simon's a lead transformation consultant at OpenCredo and is on a mission to help organizations understand and unwind complex cross-functional obstacles that get in the way of their staff and reduce the ability to serve customers. His career has taken him from being a developer in the trenches to helping various organizations take pragmatic steps from a place of chaos and paralysis to one where it becomes a little easier to see the wood for the trees. And I know Simon has some very exciting information to share, points of view, and also some interactive activities tonight. So without further ado, Simon, over to you. Really excited for the session. And thank you so much for joining and sharing with us today.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. I'm going to hold you to a very interesting session, Ash. So, but no, thank you. And also look forward to learning from everyone else and what we collectively see together. The first thing that I always struggle with is sharing my screen. So I'm going to do that before I forget. Hopefully that's working. I'm going to minimize chat because otherwise I get distracted.
Sure.
But I'll bring it up. I'll bring it up at key points. I'll let you know when I bring it up because I'm keen to hear what people say.
I'm happy to, apologies, Simon, I forgot to say, I'm happy to, I'll field the chat. And typically we wait for the big questions at the end, but if there's something that comes up relevant, are you okay if I just kind of to interrupt, if you will, and just kind of throw it out there? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And what I'll also do is, thank you, Ash. And what I'll do is also pause at certain points so you can get in there and kind of bring things up, because I'm really keen to hear what comes up for people. Help me see things differently, if that's okay. So I'm looking down at my cat who's bouncing on my desk again. I think he typically wakes up in 10 minutes. So everything should be okay for 10 minutes and then it should be chaos. Right. So, hi, I'm Simon. I'm from OpenCredo. I like complex problems, obviously cats. Thank you for having me. OpenCredo, and just in terms of what we do, we enable happier staff to deliver better software to customers sooner. And the way we do that is by uprooting complex social and technical problems. And what I'm hoping is the word social is a bit ambiguous right now, because my aim is to hopefully, if I do my job right, through our talk today, try and say what a social obstacle looks like and how we can start to uproot it together. Because managers, that feels interesting. Cool. So leading complexity. What I'd love to, sorry, the reason I've got that there is in case, I think one person gets it, unforeseen consequences. I had to give a nod to where that comes from, which is the Half-Life game, which I love. But what I'd love to talk to you about is, I'd like to talk to you about wolves. I'd like to talk to you about Repairman. I'd like to talk to you about what we can gain from those two stories to help us as managers. I'd like to then tell you another story. There's a lot of stories here about cost cutting. And at that point, introduce a tool that can help us as managers see the wood for the trees. And I'd like to talk to you about some more of my mistakes. There's plenty of them to go around. I hope these ones will be helpful. Anti-patterns. And then at the end, just in terms of, in case you're making your dinner, in case you're preparing some tea or another local beverage, at the end, there's an interactive activity that I'd love you to participate in if you have the time. Cool. So story of wolves. So there's this story, I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger, but there's a story from 1995 in Yellowstone National Park. You may already know this. There we go. And in 1995, the Yellowstone National Park Service reintroduced a number of wolves to tackle an overpopulation of deer and elk, because they were roaming into the local villages, drinking all the beer and causing chaos. So the first thing they did is they introduced the wolves, and it had the intended effect. What it meant was it reduced, the aim, sorry, was to reduce the number of deer and elk because they were causing ruckus. And there was a number of unforeseen consequences of that. The first unforeseen consequence was that the decrease in deer, elk, and other wolf actually meant that there was a reforestation, because the decrease in deer and elk meant there was more vegetation that could flourish. And what that meant was that there was increased food supply for small animals. And one of our one of those small animals, in addition to birds, foxes, hawks, and badgers, were beavers. What also happened was, as there was more wolves, those wolves actually drove out coyotes from the park and killed the numbers. There was less of them. And that further meant that there were small animals and beavers. And the reason I'm calling out beavers there is because they build dams. And with more beavers, it meant there were more dams. And with more dams, it meant there was less turbulent rivers. Rivers ran slower. That meant there was less erosion of the riverbanks. And because we now have more flourishing vegetation, more plant and tree roots to stabilize the soil around the riverbanks, it further meant that there was less erosion of the riverbanks. All those things are really interesting because they led to something unexpected, which was rivers changed course. They were now narrower and less winding. And so wolves actually changed rivers, not directly. They didn't get down on their hind legs and paws and start scraping at the rivers to change the course, but indirectly and completely unexpected, the reintroduction of wolves, which was originally there to cut down the number of elk and deer in the park to stop them having parties in the neighboring villages, actually led to less winding rivers. So what can we get from that? Complex systems comprise many interconnected parts. There was a lot of different actors in that system that all had varying roles. And the complexity meant it was really hard to predict what was going to happen as we introduced wolves. The direct outcome happened as expected, but there were all these indirect outcomes that led to rivers changing course. I'm going to stop, I'm going to pause. I lost my words a little bit in that section. Anything coming up for anyone? I'm going to bring up chat as well. And Ash, if there's anything that you think, please.
You are good on the chat. We are actively listening, and you've got head nods of the audience as you're talking.
Wow, this is good service. Thank you, Ash. Perfect. So now I'm going to tell you one more story, which is about a repairman. I would put repair person, but I couldn't squeeze it in the slide, forgive me. Right, so I want to tell you a story about Dai. Dai is a repairman. I have a question to ask you, but before I do, I just want to give you a little bit more context about the organization in which Dai works. So in this organization, there's three parts. There's a contact center, and they take bookings. They take phone calls from customers who say, hey, my washing machine's broken, can you come fix it? And they schedule the time. We have a depot, and the depot takes care of vans and spare parts, basically make sure that Dai and the other repair people have all they need to do their job. And the logistics ties all those things together. They take the booking, they take the vans and spare parts, match it to an engineer and send them out. So the question I have for you is, if you were in Dai's position, what would you need to be successful? What would you need to be able to fix the washing machine right first time? And you can use the chat, you can call it out, whatever feels right. I just want to hear what comes up for you.
Do I have the parts available that I need to carry out the repair?
Yes. Costa, yes. So do I have the right spare parts? Yeah. What else? Yes. So Ash, I see you in chat. What's the actual problem? So what am I going out to fix? Yes. Where? that's pretty key too. Where am I going? Absolutely. People to deliver the service, if not Dai. Yeah. Bring the right, yes, tools, spare parts. Where do I need to go? What is the problem I need to fix? Time constraints. Yes, that's an interesting one. I like that. Knowledge, training on how to fix the machines. Absolutely. Understanding which type of machine. Yes, those two feel like they fit nicely together. Perfect. Let's move on. I like these answers. So I think you said more than this, but this is what I've got here. So tools, transport. I need to be able to get there. I need the training skills. That was cool. I like it. Good attitude. Sorry for the ice cream cart in the background. Spare parts, machine manufacturer, model, description of problem, customer name, address, ice cream cart. And the question I have for you, the second question before I mute so you don't have to listen to that is, how much of that, if you are Dai, is in your control? And feel free to chat, speak up, whatever feels right. Not much unless you want a lot of overhead and a warehouse of stock. Yes, your garage. Yeah, that's a very fair view. What does everyone else think? Any other different views? I'm hearing people subscribe to Ash's view. Everyone can.
And just to reiterate the question, it's what's within Dai's control, right? Or what's outside of his control.
Thank you for repeating. Yes, of these things that Dai needs to be successful, what's inside his control?
I guess, I mean, it also kind of, some of it depends, right? We just need to know a bit more. Some of it is in his control, isn't it? Like transport method, maybe he has a lot of tools, maybe he understands every single machine, maybe he has perfect photographic memory, you know, who knows?
Quite possibly, yes. I think it depends on, I think what's coming up for me and what you describe, Ash, is it depends on the organization. And if we split up the organization, say in this way, where we have the depot over here responsible for spare parts, and we have logistics over here for making sure that that Dai knows where to go, then it kind of reduces the opportunity for what Dai has control over, compared to another organization where maybe Dai has more autonomy.
And I think you're missing one more thing, which is the customer. So for example, one thing that was missed out on the list was probably gaining entry to the premises. If the person's not there, you might struggle to get that. So there are definitely three active participants in this at least.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, that's good. And of those three, if this is a big Venn diagram, you know, that Dai would feel like he has the smallest circle almost. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mike. And yes, Ash, I like your point, because attitude is an interesting one. There's things that determine attitude. Yeah, and if he doesn't have what he needs to be successful, that can start to maybe quash his attitude. I like that. Thank you. And I like the customer thing. Thank you for helping me see things differently. Thank you, Mike.
And it also kind of depends surely on what you mean by control, because things like tools, you may not have the tools, but you may have the agency to be able to get the right tools if he understands the domain problem properly. So there's you know, one factor removed control as well.
Yeah, that resonates. I think you can succeed in spite of the organization, albeit sometimes being draining. But yes, if you know the organization, you can work around it. Absolutely. So what this brings out for me is there's no one. Actually, I won't tell you just yet. I want to show you another two slides first. So a great man once said that the system that people work in and interaction with people may account for 90-95% of performance. So 95% of performance of an organization is the system, how it's constructed, the interactions, and 5% is the individual. And for me, that 5%, I think, Mike, is, you know, what's coming up for me is kind of what you're putting in there, and what I've heard about attitude. You know, there's a little bit of attitude in there. There's a little bit of being able to work around the system. But 95%, a lot of it is outside of our control. And I invite scrutiny on that, please. Now, I just want to put that, I want to paint it another way, if that's okay. If we imagine a sliding scale of the degree of independence, and if we imagine like we have a bowling team on the left-hand side, just to bring this sliding scale to life. You know, bowling team, as I understand, you'll see my understanding is very naive. They go to the bowling alley, they all work independently, they throw their balls at the pins, and then we add up the scores at the end. And what that means is each individual can just do their job, walk away, job done. They don't depend on each other to do a good job. And if we go a step to the right, a big step to the right, we have an orchestra. An orchestra needs to be harmonious. They're interdependent on each other because they need to create a wonderful sound together. And no one person can do that in isolation. They have to do it together. They have to practice together. They have to create a symphony. And if we go one step further, we've seen Dai's situation. We've seen a business, a complex business, where no one person in isolation can be successful. A great developer cannot ship, in a big, complex organization, cannot ship a great product. We have to think about other things that may be outside of his or her control. You know, product, user research, testing, strategy, hiring, pay, all those things kind of add up and they're little chips, but they add up over time. Apparently to 95%. And on the left-hand side, whilst performance may be closely tied to individual ability, we hire the best bowlers, they all work, they just come in and do their job. Well, we add up the score, they walk off and we won. Whereas on the right-hand side, it's about how the business cooperates. It's about how all the different parts, in Dai's case, logistics, etc., work together to allow the organization to be successful in its purpose of fixing washing machines. I'm going to pause there and see if there's anything coming up for anyone.
You've got head nods, Simon.
I've got head nods. I love head nods. Thanks. I'm grateful. Easy audience so far, but we'll see what comes up. We'll see what comes up. Okay. So then I just want to add one more thing here. I'm going to do something really, really cheeky. I'm going to conflate leadership and management. And for this purpose, I promise, I think it's okay. I know if we're talking about other things, it may not be okay. So Bill Campbell said that leadership is about recognizing that there's greatness in everyone. And your job is to create an environment where that greatness can emerge. And so for me, if I was to summarize everything we've seen, just slotting that one thing at the end, then for me, I think organizations are complex, where no one person can be successful in isolation, die or otherwise. And improving organizations requires to improve how the parts of the organization interact, how they kind of, the harmony, how they come together to help their customers. And for me, I think managers are force multipliers. And what that means is the only way they can really multiply the force of a team or an organization is by helping those interactions. So I propose in this case, the way I frame a manager is helping those interactions improve. Please, Mike.
Maybe being a little pedantic here and maybe asking questions about definitions of words, but the word manager doesn't sit right with me. Facilitator, servant leader, all of these types of things do. But managers tend to manage problems and they tend to manage down rather than managing up.
Ooh, yes. Sorry, that really resonates. I really love that. So what I want to, so you put it really well. For me, there's a manager can look in two directions. As you said, down, am I squeezing the most from my staff? Sorry, I wanted to go to a slide. So I kind of wanted to, I had this slide and I took it out because it didn't really feel helpful. But for me, it's like, does a manager look down, as you said, right? Are they looking at squeezing their staff, getting the most out of every individual, the parts, thinking about ranking individuals, annual appraisal, firing lowest performers? Or are they looking into the system and understanding that it's complex? And what we need to do is we need to try and help people work well and in harmony. And therefore we need to kind of wrangle the system, thinking about strategy, psychological safety, coordination, but also something else that we're going to get to. And really, I feel managers should be looking that way. So it's my ideal view of what a manager should be. But tell me, Mike, what comes up for you? I really like your comment.
I just wonder whether the word manager is too far loaded, and whether actually changing the word would enhance the ethos of trying to create an environment to allow others to succeed, and maybe finding a better word might be better just because of the historical nature of the word manager.
Yeah, that resonates. I like that. And so when you said servant leader and things like that, those are the kind of words that you were spitballing as words that feel closer to that. Yes, that resonates. It feels almost like Teely. It's like, the manager coming underneath and helping. Yes, so servant leader. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Ash.
Mike, you got me going now.
Ooh.
Question, and Simon, feel free to put a pin in this and put this to the Q&A at the end. But in modern day organizations, and you just interpret that meaning loosely, right? Whatever that resonates with you, in modern type of organizations, is manager still is it still a valid role? Do we need managers anymore? Or is it actually going towards self-organization, hierarchies and leadership, and being clear on accountabilities and responsibilities? Is manager outdated? Is it a dated concept? I don't know. Is it right anymore? Is it evolved? Is that word still meaningful? Or does it have a negative connotation in the majority of settings now? I don't know.
I'm curious what's coming up for Mike, but Mike, do
Well,
you want to go first? Well, Dermot.
Yes, I was just going to, I think for me, the simple answer to that is no. Organizations have worked without managers. I think the transition from an organization that has managers to an organization that doesn't have managers is a difficult transition that it's like all things. If you build a remote first organization versus trying to move to remote, you'll find pain and all that sort of stuff, and the transition will be harder. And the final thing I'd say on this is Google Project Oxygen, where they tried to prove that you don't need managers, and found actually that in their circumstance they did want and need managers, and then tried to figure out through data what a good and high performing manager was and how to assess for good management and what the impact of it was on their people. So they proved to themselves, whether anyone wants to follow it, that they did need managers.
Can I lean in? I really love this. This is a really good question, and I love the answer, Dermot. It feels like, and it kind of connected to Mike's point, and it feels, manage is a solution, but what's the problem? And as the way I connect to Mike's point is, Mike is, if I interpret it correctly, a manager is a very broad term. It can mean a million different things, good and bad. And so, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And if we're just saying, let's create a flat organization because it creates autonomy, that's not necessarily, we're shifting something out that maybe used to be there, and there may be things like sharing context that we now no longer have the route to do. So I think it depends on what a manager is there to, has historically been there to do. What's the problem they're solving by being there? Yeah, that's what comes up for me. I'm curious if anything else comes up to really.
I might jump in again. I think Dermot had it kind of right. I think it depends. I think organizations, some of them need managers, and the transition from a very management-centered structure and organization to no management at all can be quite devastating to an organization. But I think maybe is the answer maybe education and communication. So if we go into our organizations and we have exactly this conversation, right? That we want to empower people. We want people who are at the cold face to help us understand what they need to succeed. And that you should basically take it on board, that you go to the people above you, the leaders, the people with authority, to try to get them to help facilitate an environment where you can succeed. That ethos, that cultural change, that mindset change in an organization, I think is the important part. And what we call the people at the end of the day, probably less so.
Yeah. Sorry, there's so much that I need to digest, but that resonates. It feels like if the answer of what a manager provides is separating thinking from doing, so we don't trust doers, then the very old view of what management is, then that's not quite right. But if we recognize what the role of a manager is, it doesn't have to. Then we can find more creative solutions. If it's about I can't remember exactly how you put it, but make sure everyone has the information they need to solve problems. And there's other ways of doing that, if I understood correctly.
Well, I think it's about empowerment, I think is really the word I was probably trying to look for. So going into an organization and telling people that they are empowered to be able to ask, to have environments created that allow them to succeed or optimize their success. I think if we can change that mindset, then rather having one person trying to change everything, you've got hundreds of people trying to change stuff for the better. Maybe that's a problem more than a solution. I don't know.
I think so. I think it was. Sorry, that resonates. I feel in those kind of scenarios, connected with what Dermot said, we kind of remove managers and expect we know how to make decisions without managers. We know how to share context without managers. That people can just be empowered because of their mindset, and we forget that there's other things necessary. So I think between what you said, the symphony of what you said between you about it depends, and we need to understand the context and the state of the organization. What is the problem that we need to solve right now? Then we find something really interesting. So I like it. Ooh, you're my kind of guys. Perfect. you mind if I continue a little bit? Because I'm
Oh
wondering.
yeah,
if we
it's
might
just Vance in the
start
chat. Crack on, Simon. We will.
to-
You got to keep us
This is really
on,
good.
Simon, because we
Oh,
love
okay.
we love the Q&A and the chat and the ALN. So you keep going.
Okay, I'll try. Oh, okay. I'm gonna close the chat, otherwise I will get distracted. Okay, perfect. Okay, so love that. Managers, overloaded term, sometimes need them, sometimes don't, depends on what the problem is and what their role is in the solution, and so much more. Cool. So why is managing hard? This is this is something I want to try and explore. And this is quite a high-level view, and I promise it will get a little bit more tangible. So if we imagine, I promise I've only got 2 more sliding scales. If we imagine a sliding scale on the left here, and we kind of think about roles within our remit, i.e. roles where each action, each decision affects fewer people. And maybe we have value creators there. We have individual contributors. That might be people creating value directly for customers, working in a banking branch. It might be people creating indirect value for customers through kind of creating software that allows customers to do what they want and more on their terms. And then up here, we have some wider remit, where every action affects many people. As we step up, we have managers. And the kind of question that they're trying to answer is, did what I just do help my team or make it worse? And then we might have executives even higher up. What I mean is just managers and managers. What I mean here is, the question that they want to answer is, did the strategy that I've just unleashed on my organization, did it help my organization improve profits now and in the future? In the future being the key term, because that's when we start to think about the environment. We start to think about the staff, because we need this to be an infinite organization, something that will exist into the future, not just now. This is the thing that I feel is, with value creators, the timeline for getting feedback tends to be, not always, a little bit sooner. So if I'm a developer, I can compile my code. And that doesn't mean it's great code and it's going to solve the customer's problem, but it is a step towards it. I get some kind of feedback. Whereas on the right-hand side, it's kind of like wolves change rivers situation. I don't know whether the strategy I just unleashed in my organization is going to help them, their customers, the environment. I have no idea, and I won't find out probably for years. I probably will never find out. It's probably my successor that will find out and inherit what I've got. Because feedback comes late, and it also comes in a very diffuse way. And what I would really like to do is give you an impression of what late and diffuse means, because those words are very ambiguous. Before I do, I just want to kind of draw a line and summarize. So managers are force multipliers whose role is to improve interactions. Their actions affect many in an organization, particularly a number of staff. And the impact of their actions is hard to predict, and feedback is diffuse and late. Managers are kind of like a wolves changing rivers situation. So how can managers learn from their actions? If they can't see it clearly, whether what they did today is improving the status quo rather than degrading it, how can they adapt their behaviors? And that's where I want to go. I want to try and answer that question. So I want to tell you a story. And I hope and this is about a company I called InGen. It's a real story, but I've called it InGen to try and keep it anonymous. And so this is a cause and effect diagram. And the way to read it is really, really simple. And I'll walk you through it, I'll narrate it, don't worry. Or a current reality tree, you may be more familiar with these than I am, is that an arrow means if then, and a circle means and. So for example, if there is a focus on reducing employee headcount and workload of business teams is increasing, then business teams do more work with less people. If that makes sense, I'll continue. Jump in anytime. So let's start down here. So the primary business goal in this organization at that time I was there was near-term cost savings. And that seems rational. If that was the case, that's leading to a few things, as you can see. It's got 3 arrows coming out. I'm going to go to the right first. In this case, they had an outsourcer, and the outsourcer was running their IT operations. And they were looking at the bill, and they saw that the outsourcer was a significant cost. So given that was the case and they were trying to reduce short-term costs, and the outsourcers could not reduce headcount, I'll come back to why in a second, all the outsourcers could do in the face of that pressure was try and reduce their day rates. But the outsourcers are a business. They need to remain profitable. So if they need to remain profitable and they're under pressure to reduce their day rates, then all they can do is cycle in more junior talent with a lower cost, a lower wage, in place of the more experienced talent so they can maintain a margin. And the interesting thing is that leads to two things. By the way, just interrupt if this isn't making sense, please. That leads to two things. The first thing is that if outsourcers cycle in junior talent in place of the experienced talent, and this outsourcer is looking after IT operations, rebooting computers, setting up servers, that kind of stuff. And automating those problems away requires the experienced talent who've now left the pitch. Outsourcers cannot automate repetitive tasks, things they have to do daily, day in, day out. And that means they cannot reduce the quantity of work and therefore they cannot reduce their headcount. So next time round, when there's pressure to reduce costs more, they're snookered. There's nothing they can do. All they can do is, again, reduce their day rate because they've not been able to reduce the quantity of work that they have. But I want to talk about something more interesting now. So if the outsourcers cycle in more junior talent in place of experienced talent, and junior talent, through no fault of their own, is more likely to make mistakes, there's new context, there's some new technical elements to what they do that are new to them, then significant tickets coming to this IT operations team are going to be serviced late or serviced incorrectly. And that leads to two things. Firstly, if there are people who are waiting on these tickets, then delayed tickets will lead to delayed projects. If delayed projects incur cost because we have employees waiting on these projects to go through, IT costs may increase, possibly. But also significant tickets are serviced later and correctly, and correcting mistakes takes time and money. IT costs are increasing. We have to pay them once to make the mistake and once to correct the mistake. No fault of their own. It's just the situation. We put them in a difficult spot. And if IT costs increase for that reason, among others, and we'll talk about the others in a second, then business confidence in IT may be reduced. And that means that they may redouble focus on reducing costs if there's a kind of a business IT divide, which there was in this organization, where the business control the budget. And that means that we might reinforce the primary business goal of near-term cost savings. But I'll talk about some more interesting parts of this now. So if the primary business goal was near-term cost savings, as we saw, if that is the case, and rightly or wrongly, employees are seen as a significant cost, then there might be a focus on reducing employee headcount. Again, rightly or wrongly. If that is the case, and the workload in the business teams is increasing, then the business teams must do more work with less people. If that is the case, and automation is a way of allowing us to do more work with less people in certain circumstances, then the business teams must automate the work because they're shedding people and they still have a lot to do. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to go down another path and join up. Also, if the primary business goal is near-term cost savings, and they believe they had a centralized IT function where they take the projects with the highest return on investment and deliver those because they had a limited budget every year. If the primary business goal is near-term cost savings and they think maximizing return on investment will unlock cost savings, then the IT projects that come in on an annual basis will be prioritized based on return on investment because they know they can't do everything. So they'll just focus on those ones with the highest return on investment. If that is the case, and there's limited budget available in any given year, then some business areas will not have their IT projects completed because there just isn't enough budget to go around. And that means all the business teams can do is create their own tools, Excel, VBA. And if there are many business teams with the same problem, what we're going to do is we're going to have a rise of shadow IT. And if there's a rise of shadow IT and maintaining those tools comes at a cost, directly, indirectly, then there's going to be a significant cost growing across the business and IT costs will increase. The even more interesting piece is if IT projects are prioritized based on return on investment, then we'll try and game the system because they're under pressure, they're losing people and they have a growing amount of work to do. So they're going to try and get their projects through as best they can, and I would do the same. So if IT projects are prioritized based on return on investment and technical shortcuts improve return on investment, then each project will increase the complexity of the IT landscape. What I mean by that is the business will say, can you do that any cheaper? What happens if you use sticky back plastic? and sellotape. Can you do it cheaper then? Oh, great. Let's do that. And so then, because we're incentivized to reduce the cost of projects, IT will do it on the cheap. And if IT do it on the cheap, every project that we see through is going to erode the IT estate. It's going to bring more and more technical debt. And as we have more and more technical debt, it gets harder and harder to build on that IT estate, which means that every project is going to cost even more because it requires more analysis to work out how are we going to do this? And it requires more development time, and it requires more testing. Because the more we've incentivized return on investment, the more we've incentivized the erosion of the IT estate, which means that every project is growing. There's one other thing that I'll mention, because there's two other avenues. There's one other thing I want to mention, which is if IT projects are prioritized based on return on investment, and projects therefore must be scoped and analyzed to calculate the return on investment, what is the return on investment on this project, then what we're going to do is we're going to have significant projects that are scoped and analyzed but never taken forward, because they only have a limited budget every year. They're basically trying to work out what can and can't we deliver. And so in this case, they had 30% of the projects they ran these calculations on, they never took forward. And they had dedicated teams of analysts on the ground trying to look through the requirements, look through the, design the architecture. And that was a lot of cost. And these were all consultants. So if significant projects are scoped and analyzed but never taken forward, and scoping and analyzed projects consume significant effort, what we're doing is we're increasing costs purely just by the target that we've set, the measurement of success. And all of those things meant that costs were actually increasing. So we were trying to reduce costs, but by trying to reduce costs and focus on costs directly, we were kind of driving our car by looking in the rearview mirror, and actually costs were increasing. And this is all felt very logical. They're very smart leaders. And I would have done the same in their situation, but it actually led to the opposite effect. I hope that made sense. That was a bit more of a complex example than I was hoping for. I'm going to pause. I'm going to see what's coming up in the chat. Anything relating to that, anything that didn't make sense or you disagree with?
You've got some head nods, Simon, and nothing new in the chat, just captive audience listening and following.
I'm grateful you managed to keep up. That felt more complex, but thank you. True 7 meters is hard to find. Perfect. Okay. Let me summarize then. Yeah, actually, I have one question. So if you were in this organization, you were a manager, someone, and when I mean manager in this case, someone who can change the rules, where would you focus your efforts?
I think I'd focus on those projects that delivered greatest return on investment, but then I'm guessing that would have to tie into the values and the objectives of that company. But if it was a company that was looking at reducing costs and delivering profit, I think I'd probably focus on identifying those ROI projects and kind of follow that direction until possibly in the future we could actually bring in further projects.
Well, it's interesting, Costa. So what I was hearing was that, I want to make sure I understood correctly, that if we focused hard on those projects with highest ROI, return on investment, we might be able to improve the situation. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, if outsourcing is a problem that cannot be resolved in-house, then I probably would have to accept that isn't something that I can adjust. So then that leads me to the actual projects that we're hoping to deliver. So I've basically got to establish where that change can be realized. And if outsourcing isn't going to deliver those cost savings, then I need to focus somewhere else.
Oh, that's interesting. And so and I said to sort of Dermot, focus on automation projects. So what's interesting, if I understood correctly, was let's go to Dermot first. I want to come back to Costa because these are both interesting points. So with regards to automation, that resonates, because I can understand that we can break this cycle over here, this downward spiral, that the more we pressure the outsourcers, the more they bring in junior talent, the more we bring in junior talents, the more they make mistakes, the more mistakes they make through no fault of their own, the more that we pay them to correct those mistakes, and the less they can actually bring in automation to reduce the repetitive work. So that would, feels like it would break this downward spiral, if I've understood them, and that could start to help. Is that what comes up for you?
Just to add to that, the way I see it is, if you focused on the automation, you could automate out the experienced people, right? So get them to build their own replacement automation stuff. So analyze things for, in terms of return on investment, it's like whichever repetitive tasks can be automated and give us the biggest return on that type of investment. Then we start to reduce the cost of outsourcing, because we can either cycle in juniors and they yeah. So yeah, that's what I was thinking on that. And then you've got the automation, getting more for less in the middle. Business teams must automate their work. So again, trying to focus rather than necessarily finding IT projects that get a return on investment in terms of money in the door, if you like. You're looking at a return on investment in terms of multiplying the business to be able to do more for less.
Yes, I think so. I think what you say resonates. I think there's kind of almost two layers to this. The first layer is, if the goal is near-term cost savings, and we can't change that goal, then I think you're starting to find a way to help towards that. You're breaking a downward spiral on the right-hand side, and you're trying to remove the role the outsourcer plays. And I think what Ash mentions in chat resonates with me, that if we focus more and more on return on investment, we're kind of exacerbating the downward spiral we're seeing. That in this case, the more we focus on return on investment, the more we focus on calculations and expend 30% of our workforce just purely doing analysis, the more we prioritize projects and implement them in the cheapest way possible, that causes our IT estate to bloat, become more complex, meaning every future project takes more time and money to see through with a bit more risk. What comes up for you, Costa? Did I explain that in a way that resonates?
Sure. I'm just responding to Dermot's point. I'm wondering, Dermot, if the focus of the business is more targeted towards what can be done, can you not automate those focus projects which delivers this return on investment, which potentially builds capital for an increasing number of projects in the future, rather than saying that we focus on junior talent and train them up, so that we can keep the same number of projects. I'm just wondering if there's a chicken and egg in play here, and that's a question for anybody, but Dermot is I had in mind.
Well, I think from one of the comments mentioning about reframe, what comes to my mind in what you're saying is, I agree with you. The ultimate goal would be trying to maximize that return on investment, but IT and the analysis of the problem is the whole business and the strategy is set around cost savings, and so we're prioritizing on return on investment, and so we framed it around that parameter at the cost of all others, right? So you've got to reframe the problem at different levels to say, yes, the overall strategy is cost saving, but we're not going to get there in one step. What we have to do is start to think about these shorter steps. And if these teams over here can analyze it in this way, we'll get to, so again, the only reason why we're able to talk like this is because we can see the wood for the trees from this analysis and cause and effect. Ultimately, if somebody said to me at a higher level, we're cost saving because we're running out of money or whatever, return on investment, I'd go straight for return on investment and probably make the same mistakes that these, so for me, you're right, return on investment, but the people who get the systems thinking type of approach would look at not just the symptoms, but the causes, and then say, actually, if we start to focus on automation, we'll get to those return on investment projects a lot quicker.
That was so well put down. That I wish you were doing the presentation, honestly, because I think the way that you.
No, I'm glad you are.
Oh,
you know more about it than me.
I'm not so sure, but thank you. I think the way that you frame it is wonderful. In that, what we need here is a change in rules. The rule here of focusing on cost savings directly, at the exclusion of everything else, is causing the whole system to go into a downward spiral. And the only way out of that, sustainably, is to change the rules. Let me give you a few more examples. That was really interesting. And so just to bring the wolves and rivers situation into this, if I was in the system, I'd focus on return on investment. I prioritize my projects, and logically, I would expect that we'd start to increase our margins over time because costs would reduce. It feels perfectly rational. And it's only when we can see the knock-on impact of what we're doing through cause and effect, as you put it, Dermot, through a causality diagram, can we actually start to see indirectly all these symptoms emerging, all these green post-its, all these problems emerging. And only when we trace back and understand the kind of the indirect things that are happening over a long extended period of time can we actually start to understand why our action as a manager, the rule that we originally took to focus on near-term cost savings, was not the right one. If we can't see the wood for the trees, if we can't see that causality, if we can't trace back and see things indirectly over an extended period of time, it's impossible to change our behavior and change the rule that's causing the organization to go downward.
Simon?
Yeah.
Can I just ask, are we making some assumptions? So we certainly made some assumptions there in that diagram. If my business was having a real short-term problem, cash flow problems, which is one of the biggest contributors to the failure of small companies, then return on investment is too long-term a strategy potentially, and cost saving would be an immediate way of at least giving us a lifeline. So, yet again, I'm tempted to say, what is the underlying problem? And I don't think we can get it from this diagram, so we've got to make some assumptions, and I appreciate that.
I think if I understood correctly, yes, every context is different, every story is unique, and I think what we need to do is we need to use this kind of thinking to surface our assumptions and make them explicit, so we can understand in that context, in that situation, what's right for us, and amend our actions based on what is really happening.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm hearing from everybody, applying the 5 whys to try and understand the real underlying problems here. But I think with diagrams like these, the problem that I see as well is the further out you go from a primary cause, if indeed that is your primary motivation, the more things we may have left off this diagram that may impact us, and more complexity we need to understand in order to get to those outer points.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think
so.
Yeah. So for example, if you work with Kinevin and obviously what Dave Snowden says, he says in a complex system, you can't really understand the whole thing. And so the only thing that you can do is start where you are at the moment, move to the next logical course, and then have feedback loops that allow you to pivot and correct from there. At least that's my understanding. Because things are so complex that you couldn't really understand. And there's things in the diagram that you said, for example, you're going to analyze all of your projects, and then the cost of analyzing all of your projects, especially if you don't do some of them, means that you've got a lot of waste in the system. But that's not necessarily true, because if you put them in priority and you did them one at a time and then simply just did the first one that seemed to be a realistic one to follow, you've not done the analysis for any subsequent ones, and hence you reduce your waste. So that's why I'm saying there's certain things in a complex diagram like this that we may lose in analysis.
Yeah. Sorry, that really resonates. I think there's 2 things there. One is missold or miscommunicated this tool a little bit, but also nonetheless, every model is wrong and some are helpful. So there's always a limitation, and I completely agree with that, especially a volatile system. So I think the way that this diagram is built up, I think there's something coming from chat, is we do interviews around the business to understand what are the obstacles, what are the things getting away, what are the symptoms, what are the pains, the things that are hurting you as a business. And we do that as wide as feels right. Then we work backwards, not outwards. And by asking why, we start to see commonality in the causes, and things actually start to strangely converge and it doesn't necessarily always converge on one cause, but it does. There's generally less causes than there are negative effects. And that just gives us a point of leverage and a point of focus. Mike, something's going.
I mean, I see what you're trying to do. I just think the further you go down or up any tree, the more chance there is that you get something wrong along the way. So it's the inherent problem with trying to understand a complex problem.
I think that's possible. I guess it depends on the nature of the complexity. And I think there's something that for me to learn in what you're saying, Mike. So I think there's also, something I'd like to learn from what you're sharing with me.
I guess I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying there's a caution to be had, maybe.
Yes. No, I absolutely agree. And so the summary I have here is every model is wrong, some are helpful. So be aware of your tools. Absolutely.
Maybe this is for a bridge between complicated and complex, Mike. If something is truly in that deep end of complex, I mean, Dave knows his stuff, right? When he came and spoke to us the other month. But I at least with smaller things, maybe, and divisions and things like that, like I see the value of using this tool with certain clients that I'm working with, but value in every tool, like you say, Simon, for the situation, depending on the needs of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I need to understand the divisions of the tools better, Mike. So there's definitely something for me to learn there. I think generally, I think if I understood correctly, there's kind of two views. I think this does live nicely in the liminal zone between complicated and complex. I think from a Cynefin framework perspective. I think generally what's also helpful though is that everything averages out over time, in that the patterns become more clear the bigger the numbers, things should converge to a degree. But nonetheless, I still agree that when and where to use this tool, we need to be wary of, as with every tool. So I still agree with your fundamental point.
No, I agree. In a complicated environment or a complicated domain problem, I think Ashley's right. This can be used because you can understand with enough expertise all of the nuances.
Oh yeah, so I think also depends. Actually, you're helping me. I think also it depends what you mean by complex. I think for me, complex is where no one person understands the whole. Complex is where there's lots of people, and you kind of need to open loads of doors to understand. So to a degree, it can help, but again, there's still boundaries of where this can help. And as you move further into complex, maybe not.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think I was just biased by leading in complexity. So I was biased by the name of the talk, I think, more than anything.
Yes, and I think the theory of constraints, which is where this comes, as I think you know better than me, it has an interesting view on complexity. But I'd love to chat more, Mike. You're teaching me what you share, so thank you. So to summarize, I think what we saw in the previous diagram is that things tend to converge in systems, and if the further down you trace, generally the fewer causes that there tend to be. There may be one, there may be a few, but it helps you find the leverage points. And so that rather than trying to treat all the symptoms in isolation and expending a lot of effort, you can focus on the fewer things that can help. So summary. By understanding through cause and effect, we can focus our actions on the fewer common causes behind many obstacles, which is what we want to do as managers. We want to create systems that are more harmonious, that help the interactions between the individuals. We can understand why focusing anywhere that isn't a common cause leads only to temporary improvement. And I think that came up in some of the questions that were raised. and also helps us understand why things that we may have tried in the past didn't work. It gives us a mental model, helps us reevaluate our mental model, helps through a visual way, allows us to share it and get it scrutinized by other people. But every model is wrong, but some are helpful depending on the circumstance. Thank you for helping me see that more clearly. There's some management anti-patterns here. I realize we're already at half past. I was wondering if this can all be shared as PDF. I was wondering if it's worth talking more and seeing what came up for people as we went through.
You guys want to happy for a vote? Simon, how much time do you think it would take to get through management anti-patterns? It's just the balance between Q&A or sharing more. So absolutely, your call and the audience's call. It's just a bit of that trade-off of which would people prefer.
In case it helps. So what was left is
both. We have both. I'm keen to hear more. Both. It sounds like you're getting encouragement. Keep on going, Simon. And then we'll try to get some Q&A and wrap up at a reasonable time.
Sure, thank you. Just worry for people's time. The feedback has been really helpful. Thank you. And so I'll go through the anti-patterns. There's also an interactive exercise, but you can take that offline. It's just a shared mirror board. So the management anti-patterns were over there. Yeah. So these are Simon's mistakes, really, and things that he's been fortunate to see. So the first one is fear of failure. And this, again, please take these anti-patterns with a pinch of salt. They're just observations that are context specific. I'm sure they won't be represented in organizations in this pure form, but I hope they're helpful. So in this scenario, this is where if staff reprimanded for unexpected developments, that might lead to a few interesting things. If that is the case, and plans will need to adapt because the world is not predictable, and staff may not feel safe speaking up. And if that is the case, and the impact of issues grows over time, but they're still not expressed because we're reprimanded if we speak up, and managers may be surprised by big issues later in the day. And if that is the case, and big issues are harder to deal with, then managers may lose face in front of their managers because they will bubble up. And if that is the case, then staff may be reprimanded for unexpected developments, for bringing things up late or not bringing them up at all and then being discovered. And if that is the case, then staff may avoid also taking risks. And if change involves experimentation, there may be resistance to change. There's some book recommendations here, things that came up for me. But skill erosion, this is one that I've seen more recently. And so if learning takes time, I'm whizzing through this, interrupt me anytime, please. If learning does take time, and there is frequent pressure to meet short-term deadlines, then staff may not be able to grow the skills that matter to them. And that can lead to two things. If staff aren't able to grow the skills that matter to them, and that's one of the 3 pillars of intrinsic motivation, then team members may feel demotivated. They may not be able to grow. And that may lead to attrition. And that may mean that skills are lost over time because we lose them with the people, depending on the organization. That plus staff not being able to grow the skills that matter mean that they may not have the skills as a team to handle all the incoming work. And in that circumstance, organizations may turn to alternatives. In the face of short-term deadlines, they may turn to consultants to supplement that skill gap. But what that means is we take some of the work that gives staff the opportunity to learn away from them. And so they don't have the opportunity to learn, they don't have the ability to create the skills because the consultants have stepped into that space. Not always, it depends. But that means we're still back at the same problem with staff being unable to grow the skills that matter to them. But also if staff do not have the skills to handle incoming work, we could instead turn to managers. Managers may be promoted in some areas because of their competence as an individual contributor. And if they take the work on themselves, at least the two things, they may burn out at some point, but it may mean that, again, their staff do not have the opportunity to learn. And this was something this was one of my mistakes where I was trying to help my staff by helping them do the work. And that meant they didn't have the opportunity to do the work themselves and learn from it. And then strategy absence, which is if there's no strategy or common goal across teams, and all teams have an individual goal. Like you may think of InfoSec, development operations in a more traditional organization, they have intrinsic goals that they need to reach. then teams may have competing priorities. And in that case, work may not transition as smoothly across those different parts of the organization. And that leads to two things. Firstly, it means that projects may move more slowly and unpredictably. And if that is the case, and we have an end customer in the organization, I'm thinking of the traditional organizations, we may have a strange relationship with them because they're waiting the end, waiting for something to come out, and it's highly unpredictable when it will come out the other end. And so managers then may receive two kinds of escalations from their teams because there's friction in between the different teams because they have goals that they haven't quite worked out how to bring together because there's no overarching goal or an overarching strategy. And also from the end stakeholders who are waiting for something at the other end. And that means managers may be overutilized with escalations. And that means they may not have time to design a cohesive strategy across all the different teams and allow them to work in lockstep. And if they can't work in lockstep because there's no common strategy, we go around the cycle again. And some reading. Then I included this, but I'm going to skip past it. But it's just the idea of single loop learning, double loop learning, which I'm just starting to learn about myself, which is single loop learning is about trying to do the same thing and expecting a different result almost. Whereas double loop learning is the idea of looking at our assumptions, our beliefs, and working out which of them don't quite stand. And by cause and effect thinking, it helps me understand what are the beliefs that I hold about how the system works and why it isn't quite working, and take a step back to understand what do I need to change about my mental model to approach the situation differently upstream. And then there's the interactive exercise, which is a mirror board you can access anytime. And I'll just bring up so you can see it because I would love you to have a play, but really it's just the opportunity for you to exercise cause and effect thinking and see if you can, if you were a manager and everything was on fire, if you're a servant leader and everything was on fire and you had the opportunity to change the rules, but you only had limited time, limited efforts, you're one person, where would you focus your efforts? So what I'd love you to do in your own time, perhaps, is try and link these together in terms of cause and effect and see if there's something that's further down, closer to a root, that feels like something you would think about focusing more of your effort on rather than something that's at the other end, more of a symptom that you feel would be eroded if we focus more on the root. And that's really it. I'm keen to get to Q&A. I'm rushing a little bit there. I hope that's okay. I'll share the PDF, but there's a possible solution there. I realize it comes with system context, which I'm not giving you because I'm keen to invite thinking and ideally dialogue if you're working with some. Ash.
Awesome. Oh, amazing, Simon. And really over to you guys now. I think we are good with the questions in the chat. I think we've answered the questions that have come up, and then there's just a bit of back and forth band in there. But over to you guys. You know what to do. Use the raise hand functionality, and we'll get you in line, or just go ahead and start shouting out, or type your question if you're more comfortable, and we can read it out on your behalf. Shared a lot of interesting things for us to think through and digest, Simon, which is fantastic.
Simon,
oh, sorry, Costa and Dermot, I see. Sorry, did I cut someone off?
I was trying not to talk over you. I'm happy for Dermot to go first.
Costa, you're at the top, actually.
Okay.
I think you got your hand up first. So you go ahead first and then over to Dermot.
Simon, thanks, Ash. Simon, I come from, I'm a change manager, primarily in the public sector. So you can imagine the conversations around available finance and return on investments and things like that, and automation are, things that we struggle with in terms of resources and investment. And by investment, I mean investment at the very highest levels. Do you find that the approaches to the private sector should vary from the approaches in the public sector? Do you think that the limited resources that the public sector has means that the approach should be different in order to respond to those limitations, or do you still think that the underlying philosophy should be the same across the sectors? And I include the third sector in that.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think I'm fully qualified to say, but I'll give you my subjective opinion. I
Okay.
appreciate the invitation. I feel I don't feel so. I feel what we're trying to do, so all I've done here is presented systems thinking, an all but name, and I presented theory constraints as one method, Kinefin as others, of course. And I think all we're trying to do is try to understand a problem and kind of go upstream, working out where possible, is there another way of solving this upstream in such a way that we prevent other things occurring as well as what we're focusing on. And I think it has its place alongside analytical thinking, where we kind of take things apart and look at them in isolation. But yeah, I see no reason for it not to have a place everywhere, but not as the sole type of thinking. You know, systems thinking is great for certain types of problem, and analytical thinking is perfectly fine for other types. So I think it has its place, and I wouldn't necessarily segregate that place by industry, for example. I'd maybe segregate it by type of problem that you're trying to tackle, perhaps. What comes up for you?
I find that there's often a commitment to improve services, public services, and a lot of that leans towards automation. But then, you know, and we've tried in many organizations to introduce systems thinking. But I find that sometimes the flesh is willing. The flesh. I can't remember what I'm trying to say now. The mind is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so when you get to these sort of crunch moments and the realization that we're running out of money, but you're quite right. You know, I find that if you're trying to manage waste and improve process and things like that, the underlying methodology aligned with analytics should be paramount. But I just find that that's a constant struggle. So you'll be asked in as a change manager, and you find out you're also the PA, the PM, you know, and it's really frustrating, and it can be quite demoralizing. And then there's all this sort of reluctance to change because staff have been through it so many times. I'm just wondering if you felt that there was an approach that might work better for the public sector. But I think your answer is correct.
I think what you say resonates. The other thing that comes up, I mean, thank you for helping me understand what it's like to work in those kind of situations as a change manager. I think the other thing that comes up for me is a concept that helped me a little bit is John Seddon's failure versus value demand, where I can try and define it. Failure demand is work that we have to do because something that we fail to do or fail to do at the right time. I might have that slightly wrong. And things like, sometimes an example of that, for example, is a call center. The ideal of size of a call center, ideal being the key word, is 0. Generally, what we deal with in a call center is the results of things not going right earlier in the process. Like my bill, I don't understand my bill because we didn't design it properly. The repairman never came because there's something in our process that means that mistakes are possible. It doesn't mean realistically that a call center should be 0, because I realize there will always be variation. There will always be things that fall outside of that we need to deal with. But a call center is a really nice example of things that we can fix upstream. And automation for me feels like something where we want to be careful what we automate. Automation, we want to be careful what we automate, because technology solidifies processes, and if the process isn't quite right, we're solidifying something that isn't quite right, and the same, problems may arise. But so going back to your point, I'm wondering if what we're trying to tackle as a change manager is a symptom, is a failure, is of something that we could deal with by understanding what's coming before this, what's leading to this. And I'm wondering if there's something upstream. But I think, as I understood, what prevents that kind of upstream thinking is time pressure, cost pressure. One person's doing many roles, and that's hard.
Yeah.
Is that right?
But it's been really encouraging to understand how the desire to achieve an objective can sometimes have its counter pace. I love the eliminating or reintroducing wolves illustration. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Costa, and thank you for helping understand the challenges that you're fighting.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think we've got time for another question from Dermot.
Thanks, Ash. So Simon, just it's a quick one really on the mechanics of ending up with the cause and effect diagrams. It's really when you've got a blank piece of paper, where's the starting point? Like I can see the end product, right? The problem that, and every time I try this, I kind of lose faith in them halfway through because it's, Mike's point earlier, there's a lot of assumptions, and then I feel like I'm making it up as I go along, and then I kind of go, well, if I'm just making it up. So I think what I need to do is test my assumptions against everyone else's feedback through interviews. So I think I get that bit, but really it's the starting point. Like your pink note, if you show one of the previous ones, the pink box, is that, do we start like saying the problem is and then state it as a pink and work out from there, or does it start somewhere else and end up here?
Thank you. And I realized I didn't spend much time at all about talking about that, about how you do this. So there is a few books here that maybe could help, particularly I think in this case, It's Not Luck, a business novel that talks about why these tools could help, but it doesn't tell you the how, and the logical thinking process, which talk about the how. But my view, so going back to your question directly, the way that I tend to do it is, and it's not necessarily the right way, which is why I frame it that way, is trying to, talking to people, and all we're looking for, all we ask them in multiple different ways is, what are the obstacles that you encounter on a day-to-day basis, things that get in the way of you doing the work that you would like to do? And that tends to surface the green things. We build, although I tell the story bottom up, we kind of build it top down. So that surfaces the green things. What we tend to see is multiple people from different perspectives you start to see a coalescing of the problems. And through those interviews, what people help you understand is the causality. They help you understand, where is that problem coming from? So then you can start to kind of hazard a guess at what the multiple kind of coalescing things that are leading to those symptoms, the green things at the top are. And if eventually you start to get enough intuition from those discussions as to how those things can kind of tend to converge towards some commonality at the bottom, so you can understand where kind of a leverage point may be.
Right.
How does that feel? Did I answer the question in a way that helps?
Yep. Yeah. No. Definitely. So yeah, starting from surface the green problems and work your way down and see where it ends up, see where it converges. Yeah.
Yes. Happy to talk more offline if that would be of use.
Great stuff. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That's it for now.
And Mike, last but not least, and then I'll need to wrap up after that. Over to you.
I'm detecting a hurry up here.
Always time for you, Mike. You ask excellent questions, and everyone in the ALN does. This is always the best part, right? This dialogue and sharing examples and working through things together. I mean, that's the whole point of what the ALN is all about. So it's where the magic happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Simon, thank you again for all of this. It's great. Can I just ask, are these diagrams potentially bidirectional? Can you start with a symptom and get to a cause, start from a cause, see what the symptoms might be?
I think I understand, but could you ask the question a different way?
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm seeing is, if you start from a potential cause, say, if we exhibit this behavior in our teams, in our organization, in our division, whatever it might be, what are the potential implications of that? And you could then do what you did with us now and run from red to green. But equally, you could run this diagram from green to red if you really wanted to. And I think 5 whys would be running green to red.
Yes. Why would get you downwards?
Yeah. And so I think it could go bi-directionally. And I guess my worry from going red to green, if you did want to go that way, is you would introduce would you introduce theoretically sort of redundant possibilities that may not be applicable in your domain problem? Whereas if you went from top down, if I sat with my team and said, well, this is a symptom that we're seeing, why is this happening? We talk then in concrete terms, what's actually happening to us. Whereas if we talk about especially from a management point of view, about something that's trying to drive us, so the red, and then we talk about theoretical things that impact that, we may include things that actually don't happen in an organization or are less prevalent in the organization.
Oh, yes, Mike, that helps. Yes, so absolutely. The way this is constructed is top down. Yes, sorry for not making that clear. So I'd ask everyone, what are the symptoms? What are the things that are causing problems?
But you could theoretically go bottom up, right? I mean, you could start with, we want to see what the impact would be of this in our organization as a thought experiment to see what problems it may incur. Again, as what happens if we make this change in an organization? What are the ripples going to look like?
Oh, I'm excited. Yes, absolutely. So the way that this tool is being used in this diagram is like a current reality tree. Where are we today? What's happening and why? And then what you're describing is like negative branch reservation, if I understood correctly, which is, if I do this thing, what do I think will happen? And then show it to lots of people and say, what are the other side effects that could happen? And then just get enough people to kind of play devil's advocates. So you get all these horrible negative branches, all these effects, negative effects of something, an innocent action, and you can try and then trim it.
Which is far more a systems approach to trying to understand what the organizational impact of something might be, rather than just making the change based on a small number of people making a decision at the top and then letting the cards fall where they may, right?
Yes. So what you're doing is really nice. You're zooming out. This is the one tool for showing where should we focus going forward? What's the problem underlying all the symptoms? Then what you're describing nicely is a future reality tree, which is what could we do? What are the injections, the changes that we can introduce, and what do we think it could lead to? And as part of that, we think about negative branch reservation, which is tell me all the things that could go wrong. And we get everyone to answer that question. If we introduce this change here, what are all the negative branches of the trees that we could introduce? And so we, as best we can, because it's unpredictable, we try to trim it in such a way that we get more positives and less side effects. Yeah.
And obviously you introduce feedback loops, so you make sure that what you're getting is what you desire. But I think you've answered my question. That's fantastic. Thanks, Simon.
Yes, and also hopefully positive reinforcing loops so the change sticks. Yes. Thank you, Mike.
Excellent. Thanks for taking that home for us, Mike, with the last but certainly not least question of the night. Simon, thank you. I think I can speak on behalf of the ALN and say that resonated with a lot of us, and we thoroughly enjoyed that. You sparked great conversation and thought-provoking questions in the chat, with back and forth throughout the meetup and at the end of the meetup especially. Helping us look at topics like management versus leadership, interdependent parts of a whole operating in complexity and complicated landscapes. It's been really useful to see the different types of tools like the causality diagrams, future reality trees. I really liked that single loop, double loop learning. I've not come across that one before. That one was really interesting. I'll be Googling that later. And sharing your views with real examples and bringing this to life for us to help us navigate the challenges of leveraging theory of constraints and systems thinking to just help make sense of our environments and, have more confidence that we're doing the right thing and advising the right thing, right, to get these better outcomes. So thank you for sharing your insights with us and facilitating such a wonderful conversation tonight. And thank you all, as always, for such fantastic participation and feedback. The ALN wouldn't be here without wonderful speakers and then a wonderful audience as well. So thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed this evening with you all.
That's brilliant. Thanks.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
Take care, everyone. See you all next time.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.